Politician, can you make a right decision for all of us? For all of us. Politician.
Enga mana inga reo tēnā koutou katoa. We're going to start this part of the proceedings by looking back at some of the events that shaped the last decade, beginning with privatisation and what happened to our nation's resources in the 1980s.
Over half of New Zealand's banking and insurance sector was publicly owned. All these companies would be sold to their Australian and British competitors and Fay Richwhite and Fletcher Challenge. The New Zealand shipping line, established by the third Labour government, would be sold to its European competitor, Associated Container Transport. The national airline would be sold to a consortium including its competitors, Japan and Qantas Airlines. Also on the block were the Maui platform and natural gas reserves and distribution network, the petrochemical fertilizer and methanol plants, the public share of the oil refinery and oil reserves and the Motunui natural gas to synthetic petrol plant, which meets 30% of our petrol needs. All would be sold to the New Zealand-based multinational Fletcher Challenge. New Zealand Steel and the country's iron sand resources ended up in the hands of its giant Australian competitor, BHP. There are few constraints on other foreign investors.
We like to know what's happening, so we run an approval system, but we seldom turn people down. And these days especially, we're keen that people should come in from overseas and set up here. So anything that can be done from the government's point of view will be done to encourage that.
A public opinion survey showed that 79% unequivocally opposed selling state forests. Only 4% unequivocally favoured selling them. Richard Prebble was reappointed and told to sell more state assets.
We're here today to announce the sale of Telecom Corporation of New Zealand and to introduce the partners who will be guiding the company in the future.
The sale to an American-led consortium was opposed by 96% of New Zealanders. Promises safeguarding the community's interests were engraved in stone tablets made of plastic.
I'd like to thank the Treasury and the advisors to Treasury, Bartle Wilson and CS First Boston.
The national government completed most asset sales begun by Labour, but retained the Housing Corporation, Electricorp and the railway system. But soon that, including the rail ferries, was sold to an American company and Fay Richwhite. Corporatisation produced massive redundancies. Thousands of New Zealanders lost their jobs.
What about our families?
Rogernomics was hitting most sectors. Farmers and provincial towns were badly affected. 6 weeks after the election, the government announced its first economic package. Sickness benefits for solo parents were cut by 11%. Widows' benefits were cut by 17%. The dole for adults under 25 was cut by 25%. Charges for doctors' visits and medicines were increased. The public health system would be reviewed, education spending was cut, and further reports commissioned. The welfare state was being redesigned.
People are already struggling to survive just with the basic necessities of food, going to the doctors, things like that. So those things, which are the necessities which people can't meet now, are going to be put even further out of their reach.
Beneficiaries are going to have $1 billion less to spend next year. That's $1 billion less spending in the shops. That's $1 billion less production. That's $1 billion less employment.
But in the rush to set up new state-owned corporations, the rights of Maori over rivers, land and other natural resources had been forgotten. The New Zealand Maori Council took the government to court. A task force was set up inside Treasury to find ways of getting round the delays caused by Maori opposition under the Treaty of Waitangi.
The notorious Sea Lords deal began the process. Here's Witta Gardner with some of his recollections of that time.
First became aware of the fisheries issues around
1988-89 when I was the first director of the Waitangi Tribunal, and I, of course, as the director of the Waitangi Tribunal, following the muri whenua hearings, which were about the fisheries, and in December of 88 or 87, Eddie Jury wrote his famous letter to the Labour government saying, please don't proceed with the introduction of the quota management system, as there are issues around fishing which Māori, and particularly muri whenua Māori, are concerned about. The government ignored Eddie Jury's letter, and they proceeded towards implementing the quota management system, and that's when Matt, Rata and the muri whenua group injuncted the Crown, supported by Bob Mahuta and Waikato, Tibine Regan from Ngāi Tahu, and we started the collection then of the group who became the fisheries negotiators.
The negotiations took place at a time when there was very poor structure within Māori society. The customary basis of exercising authority, with the exception perhaps of the Māori Queen and Te Heu, had virtually disappeared. So you couldn't rely on custom to guide decision-making processes. And the trust boards and the various organisations that had been formed in the 30s and 40s by governments of that day trying to resolve treaty grievances, they no longer were suitable and didn't enjoy comprehensive support from the rank and file of Māori, and I think the average Māori probably didn't even know they existed, quite frankly. So those four personalities filled a vacuum.
We have, as it turns out, a number of people who purport to represent our interest, and some who don't purport to represent our interest, and they just go along and do it anyway. But one of the worries I had in the second term of the fourth Labour government, from 87 to 90, that the Labour government realises that by putting treaty clauses into legislation, they were actually setting themselves up for challenge, and they tried to actually take them out. They didn't succeed. And in the first years of the national government, Ruth Richardson saw very clearly from a Treasury viewpoint that the treaty clauses were a risk to what she called the financial stability of the government, and there was a move to try to take all clauses out of legislation.
With the stroke of a pen, substantial Māori fisheries claims were settled for good. But the deal was roundly criticised as being unrepresentative, with critics claiming that only a handful of leaders signed away the fishing rights of the entire Māori nation.
Good evening. Hana Heke did it to the flagpole, and it's happened again on One Tree Hill. The historic landmark that dominates the Auckland skyline was slashed in the night by a Māori wielding a chainsaw. The attack was no act of simple vandalism, but a deliberate gesture of anti-colonial defiance.
Sense of outrage, I think, that a tree held in great affection by many people throughout New Zealand has been taken to with a chainsaw. I mean, we have a way of doing things here, of making a point in New Zealand, don't we? We talk to each other, we make compromise, we listen.
No, we don't, Paul. What we do is you pick off, the Crown picks off 43 Māori leaders, chucks them on a plane, gives them a free ride on an aeroplane, a night in a flash hotel, and gets them to sign away the rights and protections that were negotiated on our behalf and that haven't been observed for the last 150 years. So we don't talk to each other like that. Now let's be honest about it.